They say fear keeps us alive. But what happens when you can't feel it at all? I was 16 the first time someone called me not normal. Not because I broke a rule or skipped school, but because I stood completely still, calmly watching. A man bleat out on the sidewalk after a car crash. Everyone else screamed, some cried, others ran for help. I just watched, curious, unmoved, not a flicker in my chest. And that was the moment I started wondering what was wrong with me, or if anything was wrong at all. Growing up, I'd always known I was different. While other kids were scared of the dark or horror stories, I found them fascinating, predictable. Even I didn't cry when my grandmother died, didn't flinch when I broke my arm at 9, and I didn't understand why people were so attached to feelings like they were some kind of compass. I didn't need one. I could walk through life with cold logic, seeing people as pieces on a board, predictable, manipulable, and, in many cases, disposable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back, really back. My name isn't important. In fact, I don't think identities matter all that much. They're like costumes. We wear them to play a role. Mine, I learned early to wear the mask of normal, smile when appropriate, nod during small talk, laugh at jokes, even if I didn't find them funny or didn't really understand why they were supposed to be. You see, the thing about not feeling fear is you also don't feel most other things. Not like others do. Love, I studied it like a subject. I mimicked affection. I kissed without passion. I dated without connection. It was like walking through a world painted in grayscale, pretending you see the colors everyone's obsessed with. It wasn't until college that the term psychopathy really entered my life in a meaningful way. I was taking an elective in abnormal psychology, mostly out of boredom. We had to take something outside our major, and the professor's name had a good rating on the forums. But that class changed everything. The professor showed us brain scans. Real Mister is comparing normal brains to those of diagnosed psychopaths. He explained how the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear and emotional processing, was significantly underactive in people like them. That word, them, it clung to me like static, because what he was describing wasn't them. It was me. Low emotional reactivity, lack of empathy, shallow affect, disregard for consequence, charm used for personal gain. Every single bullet point, I checked it mentally, not with shame, but with interest. It was like seeing a mirror for the first time, like I'd finally found the word for the feeling, or the lack of feeling I'd known all my life. Still, I kept quiet. I always had. You learn early when you're different that people don't take kindly to it. Being a child who doesn't cry at funerals or apologize when you hurt someone, it teaches you to perform, to wear the mask so well that even you forget it's not really your face. But that class pushed me to dig deeper. I read every paper I could find on psychopathy. I learned about Hare's psychopathy checklist, the clinical tool used to assess people like me. I took it, scored a 32 out of 40 in prison systems that would have flagged me as a high-risk individual, dangerous, unfeeling, capable of anything. But I wasn't a criminal, not in the way they expected. I didn't want to kill anyone. I didn't hurt animals. I wasn't violent. I wasn't interested in blood. That's the thing most people get wrong about psychopaths. They think we're all murderers, lunatics, monsters hiding in shadows. The truth is much colder than that. We're among you, doctors, CEOs, lawyers. Some of us are charming, respected, even admired, and yet we don't feel what you feel. It's not that I didn't understand right from wrong. I did, intellectually, but I didn't feel guilt. Guilt is an emotional tether. Mine was cut a long time ago. Maybe it was never there. One time, a girl I was seeing asked me if I ever worried I'd hurt someone. No, I said, because I don't want to. But if I did, I probably wouldn't feel bad about it. She laughed, thought I was being darkly funny, but I was just being honest. There's a strange clarity that comes with knowing your own wiring is different. It makes you question every human interaction, every tear you see, every story someone tells to evoke sympathy. Is this real, or just part of the emotional theater most people live in? I learned to mimic that theater. I studied expressions, mirrored emotions, learned which phrases work in what moments. It helped in jobs, helped with dating, helped with friendships too, or at least helped me pretend to have them. I wasn't lonely. That's another myth. Loneliness requires emotional longing. I didn't miss people. I missed patterns. I missed stimulation. When someone left, it wasn't grief. It was boredom. But for all my coldness, I had one obsession, the science of it all. I needed to understand why I was like this. Was I born this way? Was it trauma, brain chemistry, evolution? And as I dove into case studies and neuroscience, one thing became clear. Psychopathy isn't a defect, it's a variation. A brain operating on a different frequency. And I wasn't alone. I remember one experiment vividly. Researchers at a university scanned the brains of inmates who scored high on the psychopathy checklist. During the scan, they showed them disturbing images, mutilation, screaming, violence, war. A normal brain would light up in horror, discomfort, or empathy. But in these scans, the amygdala barely stirred, like showing fire to someone who's blind to its glow. It shook the researchers, but to me, it made sense. I wasn't a prisoner, but I had the same numbness inside me. When I watched videos of war or people crying from tragedy, it was like watching a movie with the volume turned down. I saw the shapes, the movements, but not the meaning. I knew what I was supposed to feel, but I never did. And yet, here's the strange part. I could make others feel. I got good at saying the right thing. People called me a great listener, told me I had a calming presence, trusted me with secrets they wouldn't tell anyone else. They didn't realize that while they were opening up, I was analyzing them, measuring reactions, testing responses, cataloging behaviors like a scientist studying an animal in its habitat. Never used that information to hurt anyone. But I could have. Knowing how someone ticks their fears, their desires, the phrases that unlock their emotions, gives you immense power. And for a while, I wrestled with what that meant. Was it manipulation if I didn't do it to cause harm? Was it still wrong if I only did it to fit in? There was one woman, though, who almost made me forget the mask. Her name was Elise. She was a psychology grad student, sharp, sarcastic, and unafraid to call people out. We met during a university seminar, where I made an offhand comment about how emotions were inefficient. She laughed, then challenged me publicly. "You sound like a textbook psychopath," she said, half-joking, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen, not judged, not misunderstood. Seen. We started talking more after that. I was intrigued by her, and I could tell she was intrigued by me too. The way I spoke, how measured I was, how I never showed anger or sadness or even excitement. One night, during a walk, she asked me something nobody ever had. Do you actually feel anything at all? Like, really feel? I paused. Normally, I would have told a half-truth, a crafted reply, something that passed. But with her, I said, not the way you do, not like most people. She looked at me for a long time. That must be lonely. I didn't reply. I didn't know how, because I didn't feel lonely. But I knew I was supposed to. I knew that if this were a movie, that would be the moment for a dramatic line or a sad glance into the distance. Instead, I just stood there, hands in my pockets, listening to the wind. Elise didn't try to change me. She asked questions, sure, but she didn't treat me like a broken thing. She treated me like a puzzle. And for a while, I thought maybe that was enough, that I could exist in a world of emotion, even if I didn't swim in it. But relationships, built on study, aren't the same as those built on connection. Eventually, she wanted more than I could give. I couldn't comfort her when her father got sick. I couldn't give her emotional intimacy. I couldn't be present in the way she needed, and so she left. Quietly, without a fight. She just said, "You don't even look sad." I didn't, because I wasn't, but something shifted. Not in my heart, I don't think it works that way for people like me. But in my mind, I realized that while I could understand the mechanics of emotion, I would always be an observer in the museum of human experience, never a participant. That realization didn't depress me. It clarified things. I doubled down on my research. I began interviewing diagnosed psychopaths. Some were in institutions, some were high-ranking professionals. And what I learned confirmed everything I suspected. We are not all the same. Some of us are dangerous, yes, because we don't feel fear and we don't feel guilt, and in the wrong context. That's a lethal combination. But others, like me, simply lack something that most people never question. A defect, maybe an adaptation. Perhaps, you see, in evolutionary terms, psychopathy can be an advantage. Less fear means more risk-taking. Less guilt means more decisive action. In business, war, crisis, these traits win. But in family, in love, in grief, we're ghosts. We move through those realms like shadows, watching, learning, imitating. I once watched a mother weep at her child's funeral. The way her shoulders shook, the guttural sobs. I wrote it all down, not out of disrespect, but to study it, to understand the script of sorrow, because I knew I'd never perform it genuinely. That's the thing that separates us. We are actors without a stage. I suppose by now you're wondering, do I ever regret anything? The answer is complicated. I regret outcomes, sometimes. Miscalculations, moments where my detachment caused unnecessary consequences, but I don't feel regret. Not in the way you do. There's no ache, no guilt. Just the recognition of a mistake and the need to avoid it next time. There was a time in my late 20s when I worked in a corporate consultancy firm. The job was simple. Manage teams, pitch ideas, solve high-stakes problems. It was an environment tailor-made for someone like me. Strategic, cold under pressure, and efficient. I climbed fast. My manager called me ice in a suit. Said it with a smile, like it was a compliment. And for a while, I thought maybe I'd found a place where I belonged. A world that valued calculation over compassion. But even there, cracks formed. I once had to fire a woman named Kara. Brilliant, but slow to adapt. I saw her as a liability to a fast-moving campaign. She had a newborn at home, and her performance had dipped. From a purely operational standpoint, it made sense to cut her. She begged, she cried, said she needed just a few more weeks to get back on track. That she was exhausted, not incompetent. I listened, nodded. Then I told her she was no longer needed. She looked at me with disbelief, as if she'd expected humanity to win over logic. And for a flicker of a second, just one, I wondered what it would be like to care the way she did, to feel the terror she felt, the weight of the decision pressing on my conscience. But nothing came. I walked out of that room, thinking only about restructuring the workflow. It wasn't until later, that night while brushing my teeth, that I saw my reflection and thought, this is how monsters are made, isn't it? But I didn't feel monstrous, just effective. That's when I started keeping a journal, not an emotional one, a log, a record of interactions, of people's reactions to me. I wanted to track cause and effect, learn from every social transaction. Over time, I began seeing patterns. Certain words triggered empathy from others. Certain gestures won trust. It was like decoding the operating system of human emotion. I tested it at bars, in meetings, even in dating apps. People responded to vulnerability, or at least the illusion of it. So I learned to share half-truths, stories about a hard childhood, vague references to anxiety, a self-deprecating joke here and there. They never questioned me. In fact, they leaned in closer. People wanted to connect with something broken. It made them feel safe. It's ironic. The more I revealed, the more they trusted me, even though I was revealing nothing at all. I began to wonder if most people even knew what real emotion was, or if they were just as good at pretending as I was. But there were moments, rare, but vivid, when I glimpsed what I was missing. One was during a hiking trip with an old college friend, Liam. We were on a narrow trail and he slipped hard, tumbled several feet down the hill. Not life-threatening, but bloody and stunned. I climbed down, checked his leg, helped him up. We walked slowly back to the cabin. He kept thanking me, tears in his eyes, saying he thought I'd saved his life. He looked at me like a hero, but the truth was, I hadn't felt fear, not even concern, just ... action. The same way I'd fix a broken tool or file a report. I'd done what made sense, not what felt right. That night, by the fire, he told me he'd never forget what I'd done. I nodded inside. I felt nothing. Later, I wrote about it in my journal. Event: Liam fall. Result: gratitude triggered. Response: positive perception of me increased. I didn't include emotion because there was none, but I included the pattern. That's what mattered. Still, moments like that made me wonder if people around me keep feeling for me, even when I don't feel for them. Does that make me human enough? Or am I just a mirror, reflecting what others project onto me? Science says the roots of psychopathy run deep. Some studies show genetic links. Others point to early childhood trauma, neglect, or brain abnormalities. I had a normal childhood, at least by most standards. No abuse, no tragedy, just a constant, quiet emptiness, like the volume of the world had been turned down from the start. When I was a kid, my mother used to ask why I never cried during movies, especially the sad ones. I'd shrug and say, I don't feel like crying. She thought I was strong. I was just disconnected. I later learned that psychopathy exists on a spectrum. Not all psychopaths are violent or criminal. Many are functional, blending into society, even thriving in it. Some call it successful psychopathy. I fit that label. But the word success implies fulfillment, and the truth is, success without feeling is like winning a race in a dream, fast, blurry, and ultimately meaningless. It was around that time I started seeing a neuropsychologist, not because I wanted to change. I knew better than to expect that, but because I wanted to map the machine. I wanted to see my own brain under the scanner, to witness the silence in the places that should have been roaring with emotion. Her name was Dr. Harris, middle-aged, reserved, sharp-eyed. She wasn't the kind who softened her voice or pretended. She understood you before she did. That I liked. She didn't flinch when I told her I didn't feel fear, or remorse, or guilt. She just nodded and asked, "When did you first realize that?" That was the beginning of a year-long study. Me, the subject. She, the observer. We did a full fMRI session, testing emotional responses. She showed me images, the same kind they used on inmates and clinical subjects. War, blood, joy, children, family, funerals. Then she showed neutral photos, then terrifying ones. I watched them all with the same mental posture. I'd wear watching a documentary about coral reefs. No movement in the chest, no unease, no pull. She didn't need to tell me the results, but she did. "Your amygdala response is severely reduced," she said, pointing at the colorless scan image. "There's minimal activity in areas associated with empathy, fear, and emotional memory. It's ... remarkably consistent." I leaned back and smiled. "So I'm a textbook case." She didn't smile back. "You're aware of it. That's unusual. Most high-scoring psychopathic individuals lack metacognition." "You don't," I shrugged. "Maybe I'm just curious." She tilted her head. "Why does that matter to you? You said you didn't want to change, so why seek this level of self-awareness?" I had no answer, not a real one. But later that night, I wrote in my journal, reason, unknown, hypothesis, self-definition, need for narrative, or simulated curiosity as a tool for self-preservation. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the closest I ever came to soul-searching. There were moments during our sessions when she'd push harder, like the time she asked me, "Do you believe you're capable of love?" I looked at her, measured her tone, her eyes. "Define." "Love, that feeling that someone's existence matters more than your own, that their joy brings you peace, that you'd suffer so they wouldn't have to." I didn't even have to think. No, I can simulate attachment. I can maintain loyalty, but I don't feel what you just described. She didn't judge me. "Just wrote something down?" I asked. Her once, if she was afraid of me. She said, "No, you're not impulsive. You're self-controlled. Most of the harm psychopaths cause comes from recklessness. But you're too deliberate." It was the closest thing to a compliment I'd ever received in a clinical setting. Still, I knew what she wouldn't say out loud. If my circumstances were different, if I had been abused, rejected, born into violence, I could have turned out very differently. The line between functional and dangerous was thinner than most wanted to believe. It's a strange thing, knowing that your life is held together, not by values or empathy, but by structure, routine, self-interest, that what keeps you good isn't goodness, but discipline. I remember a job offer that came in around then, a private intelligence firm, high salary, global travel, risky operations. I asked the recruiter, "Why me?" He said, "Because you stay calm under pressure. You don't hesitate. You don't scare easy. I almost laughed. He had no idea how literal that was. I turned it down, not out of principle, but because I valued my anonymity. I liked my life quiet, controlled, predictable. But I thought about it for weeks. What would I have become in a world that rewarded my detachment, in a world where fearlessness was the highest currency? You see, when people think about psychopaths, they think of serial killers or conmen. But what they forget is that most of us, the ones who slip through, are just ... silent. We're not out there causing chaos. We're just sitting beside you on the train, or running your company, or smiling at your child's PTA meeting. The ones who get caught, they're just the loud ones. The rest of us, we learn to stay hidden. We learn to pass. Dr. Harris once asked me if I ever wished I could feel what others feel. I told her, I don't know what I'm missing. So how could I? She said, that's fair. But sometimes, people don't realize what they're missing until it's gone. I asked her, what if they never had it to begin with? She didn't answer, and neither did I. Time changes people, they say. But for me, it only changed the environment. My routines evolved. The roles I played became more sophisticated, but the core remained untouched, insulated, untouched by time or sentiment. By my mid-30s, I'd refined everything: my career, my social skills, even my emotional mimicry. I wasn't just blending in, I was excelling. Promotions came easily. Leadership roles followed. People described me as decisive, calm under pressure, focused. No one knew that behind every well-timed smile was a machine passing outcomes. Behind every comforting phrase, a calculation. The only real challenge came from the unpredictability of others, particularly their emotions. Nothing can derail a business meeting, a negotiation, or even a dinner more than raw, unfiltered emotion. That was my blind spot, because I could never fully anticipate how people would feel, only how they would behave. And even then, feelings tend to bend behavior like wind against glass, invisible, forceful, and erratic. There was one incident that reminded me of the line I was walking. I was mentoring a junior analyst, smart, ambitious, slightly nervous. Around authority. I'd coached him through a major pitch. We'd spent weeks preparing. On the day of the presentation, he choked, froze up, his voice cracked. He lost the room in minutes. Afterward, he came to me, red-faced, on the verge of tears, apologizing. Ashamed, I told him, in the most matter-of-fact way, you're not cut out for pressure. It's better to realize it now. He didn't say anything. He quit the next morning. Later, I found out he'd been dealing with panic disorder, had begged for a chance to prove himself. That meeting had been his last shot, not at a job, but at rebuilding his self-worth. I didn't feel bad, but I did recognize the cost, so I added a note in my journal: empathy protocol missing. Consider consequence of truth delivery in future scenarios where personal identity is entangled with performance. Even my self-corrections were mechanical. Dr. Harris would have called it adaptive masking. I called it optimization. You see, I didn't want to cause pain. I wasn't malicious, but I had no emotional signal to tell me not to. Just a mental map of what to avoid, like walking blindfolded through a minefield using someone else's steps as a guide. It was around that same time that I began to feel ... tired, not emotionally, just a kind of weariness from pretending, wearing. The mask becomes exhausting when you realize no one will ever see the face beneath it. That even the closest people in your life, colleagues, friends, lovers, only know the version of you that you curated for their comfort. One evening, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at a photograph I kept on my desk. It was from a company retreat. A group shot me, smiling among others, one arm draped casually around a teammate's shoulder to anyone else. It looked warm, joyful, candid. To me, it was a record of practiced posture. I remembered where the camera had been. I remembered calculating the correct moment to smile. I remembered watching others laugh and timing my own laughter just half a beat behind, in the margins of my mind. A question stirred. Was I living a life, or just imitating one? That question haunted me more than I care to admit. It wasn't guilt or sadness. It was something harder to describe, a distant awareness that I was skating on the surface of something deeper, watching others dive into the ocean of emotion while I stayed on the frozen glass above it, perfectly balanced, perfectly detached. There was one more visit with Dr. Harris before she moved to another city. She asked me, "What do you want?" "In the long term," I said, "to understand myself completely." She smiled, almost sadly. "That's the most human answer you've ever given." I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. She handed me my files, years of reports, assessments, and raw data. And then she said something I never forgot. Some people spend their whole lives drowning in emotion. You, on the other hand, are trying to learn how to breathe underwater. After she left, I didn't seek out another specialist. Not because there wasn't more to learn, but because I'd learned enough. Enough to know that while I couldn't change what I was, I could choose what I became. I could choose control over chaos, clarity over confusion, intention over impulse. That was my way of being good, not out of kindness, but out of structure, and maybe that was enough. Somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to feel things and started focusing on how to function. That may sound clinical, maybe even cold, but for me, it was clarity. There was a strange peace in not chasing what would never come. I began designing my life like a system, every choice optimized, every relationship structured, every risk calculated. Friendships, I had a few people who believed we were close. I listened well. I remembered birthdays. I gave advice, lent money, told them when they were being irrational, which they often mistook for honesty. They called me dependable. Grounded, I never corrected them. Romantic relationships were more complex. I tried, I really did. I went on dates. I memorized emotional cues. I read entire books on attachment styles, love languages, nonverbal empathy. I was good at acting like someone who could love, but the closer someone got, the harder it became to maintain the illusion. They wanted emotional presence, vulnerability, the real me. But what is real when the core of you is absence? I remember a woman, Melissa, an artist, soft-spoken, deeply intuitive. She said I made her feel seen, safe. We spent nearly 6 months together, and I gave her everything I knew how to give: attention, consistency, presence. But one night, she looked at me and said, "I don't think you actually love me." I asked her why. She said, "Because when I cry, your eyes don't change. Because when I'm happy, you smile with your mouth but not with your soul. I don't feel you, I only see you." I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. I could imitate the mechanics of affection, but not its essence. It was like trying to describe color to someone born blind. You can say the words, but you can't transmit the experience. She left quietly, as most people do once they see the seams. And I went back to the order of things: work, routine, observation. But sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake and try to imagine what she felt, that ache people write songs about, the desperate pull of connection. I tried to simulate it in my mind, to guess at what love should feel like. And always, I'd arrive at the same place: emptiness, lined with curiosity. I wasn't broken. I was just built differently. Science gave me the words for it: amygdala dysfunction, low autonomic arousal, reduced empathy response, labels, descriptions. But none of them explained the experience of being aware of what you lack, yet still unable to feel it. The world kept moving, as it does. I advanced in my career, became a consultant for high-stakes crisis response. People said I had nerves of steel. I didn't correct them, because the truth is, I didn't have nerves at all. When you don't feel fear, you become the person people call in chaos. Plane crashes, public relations, nightmares, scandals. I could think clearly when others panicked. Not because I was brave, but because my emotional system simply didn't register the threat. There was one case, a multinational scandal involving a major brand, millions at risk, lives on the line. I walked into a war room where executives were pacing, sweating, shouting. I spoke once, calmly, with a plan, and they listened. Later, the CEO told me, "You saved us." But I hadn't done it for them. I'd done it because puzzles interest me, and chaos is just a puzzle with a countdown. People ask me sometimes if I've ever felt afraid. The answer is still no. Not during emergencies, not during illness, not even when I was held at gunpoint during a trip abroad. I remember that moment in precise detail: the man's shaking hands, the smell of sweat, the flick of his thumb on the safety, and I remember thinking, he's more afraid than I am. I might survive this just because I'm calmer. I talked him down, gave him money, walked away, and later, as others told the story with widened eyes and trembling voices, I sat quietly, unmoved. Not because I was brave, because I was blank. There's a power in that, a terrifying one, if misused. But I've learned to keep it leashed, not out of morality, but out of understanding. Unfeeling does not mean unaware, and I've always been painfully aware of what I am, of what I'm not, of what I'll never be. I've often wondered if I would be different had someone caught it early, if a teacher or parent had looked beyond the quiet behavior, the blank expressions, the calmness in crisis. Would things have changed? Would therapy have rewired my brain? Would medication have sparked emotion? But then I remind myself, this isn't an illness. It's a configuration, and like all configurations, it has strengths and voids. Sometimes I attend lectures or read memoirs from people who feel too much, empaths, artists, people drowning in their own depth. They describe it as both beautiful and unbearable. It's strange to think that they wish to feel less, while I, if I'm honest, have occasionally wished to feel something, just once, just to know what the world looks like through a heart, instead of a lens. But that kind of wish is fleeting. Asterisk, because in truth, I don't long for emotion. I long for understanding, for the ability to measure and grasp what others are shaped by, even if I'll never hold it myself. And that's perhaps the greatest irony of my existence. I live in a world ruled by feelings, yet I walk through it immune to their grip, like a man moving through fog without getting wet. Some people see this as power, some as a curse. I see it as reality. Once, years ago, I visited a trauma rehabilitation center, part of a case study we were advising. I watched children drawing pictures of memories they couldn't speak about. One boy, maybe 8, drew himself as a balloon floating above a house on fire. When I asked him about it, he said, "I didn't feel scared. I just felt far away." And I recognized something in him. The quiet, the absence, the detachment. Maybe he would grow out of it. Maybe it was temporary. But maybe, just maybe, he was like me, later. Alone in my car, I sat with that drawing in my lap and studied it the way I'd studied so many things before. The fire, the floating, the silence. That boy had found a way to explain what I never could. I wasn't standing inside the burning world. I was watching from above, always above, always unburned. Over time, I've learned to use that distance, to do work others can't, to advise in moments where emotion would be a liability, to stay calm when others need an anchor, to be the one who doesn't panic because I physically can't. And maybe that's my role. Maybe not all of us are meant to feel the heat of life. Some of us are meant to study the flame, to understand it, to shape it, to protect others from it, not because we care, but because we see the pattern they can't. Sometimes people ask me, "Do you believe you're a good person?" And I tell them the truth. I believe I make good choices, because intent is irrelevant when impact is what shapes the world. I may not feel guilt, but I understand consequence. I may not feel fear, but I understand danger. I may not feel love, but I understand loyalty, structure, and stability, and those can carry people, even if they're not born from emotion. That's what I've learned, that there is more than one way to be human. Even if you feel nothing, you can still choose something: order, reason, integrity, curiosity. These are my anchors, not because they come naturally, but because I've chosen them. And in the end, maybe that choice matters more than whether I feel it or not. They say that everyone is fighting a battle you can't see. Mine has always been invisibility, not from others, but from the very system that governs how they live, love, fear, and connect. For most people, emotion is the music of life, rising crescendos of joy, dissonant chords of grief, tender notes of affection. For me, life has always been silent. I see the instruments. I know the rhythm. I can even fake the dance. But I've never heard the song, and yet I've come to believe that doesn't disqualify me from meaning, because meaning is not reserved only for the ones who feel deeply. Sometimes it belongs to the ones who observe deeply, who understand, even without resonance, who choose structure in a world of chaos, not because they are noble, but because it is the only language they speak fluently. There are people I've helped over the years who still write to me. Former clients, colleagues, even a few who once called me a friend. They thank me for saving their business, their confidence, their sense of direction. They think I did it out of wisdom or care. But the truth is simpler. I saw the pieces, and I moved them. In a world gripped by panic and impulse, the absence of fear can be a strange kind of superpower. It allows you to see clearly when everyone else's vision is fogged by emotion, to act when others freeze. But clarity comes with distance, and distance comes with solitude. You cannot live this way and expect to be known. Not truly, people think. They want truth. But what they want is resonance, that invisible thread that says, "You feel what I feel." Without that, you remain separate, observed, sometimes respected, rarely embraced. I used to think that was a tragedy. Now I see it as reality. There is freedom in not needing what others need, in being unshaken, in walking into fire and feeling only the heat on your skin, not the fear in your chest. And there is responsibility to dot, because when you are unburdened by emotion, you are accountable for how you wield that stillness. I could have chosen destruction. I could have exploited, lied, manipulated, left ruin in my wake, and maybe, in another timeline, I did. But here, in this one, I chose order. I chose quiet service. I chose understanding over chaos. And that choice, more than any trait, defines who I am. You might still call me a psychopath. You might hear that word and imagine a knife, a shadow, a monster. But I ask you to imagine this instead. A boy standing silently at a funeral, not crying. A teenager staring calmly at a car wreck, not flinching. A man navigating crisis, not breaking. A mind dissecting emotion like an architect. Studies blueprints without building the home himself. That man is me, and this story is not a confession. It's not an apology. It's not even a warning. It's just the truth, as close as I can come to sharing what it means to live without fear, without guilt, without love, and yet still choose to move gently through the world, still choose to understand the fire I cannot feel, still choose to leave it burning, without letting it burn me. Because if nothing else, I have learned this. You don't have to feel the world to see it clearly, and sometimes seeing it clearly is enough.